friends. This is Margaret.
And this is...
And we're the Cousins Weird. And we're at terrible trend number 50.
Is that our bicentennial? Is this our bicentennial? Is that what that's called?
Bicentennial, isn't that like 200 years?
Yeah, probably because it's centennial.
It's a half century.
So how do you... Oh, yeah, it would be a half century.
A quarter.
Quarter centennial?
A half centennial. Half centennial? I don't know. We don't know.
Don't listen to me.
But anyway, I thought, it's been a while since I did something gross. It's an Egyptian gross, but it's not really, I mean, how they did this was terrible, but it's not necessarily a terrible trend because it gave us a lot of information. I'm talking about
The thing itself is...
Mummification. How Egyptians mummified people. Which was gross, but cool at the same time that they thought to do this.
It's true. It's very smart.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about that today because I'm doing a bonus episode for our Patreons on something with King Tut. And so I went back and re-listened to our episode 2 and I talk about mummification in that episode. So feel free to go back and listen to that.
You have to listen to it. It's a good episode.
It is a good episode. But I'm like, I need to go into a little more detail, in depth on mummification.
I know. Yeah. It's been how long since we did that episode? Almost
2 years.
Almost done 2 years. And for the last 2 years, I was like, I wish Margaret would have went into more detail on mummification for me.
I know you did.
To hear it. Okay, let's go.
You really do. Okay, so from the years, we're talking the pre-dynastic period of Egypt, which was about 6,000 to 3150 BCE, a long time ago.
It's a while ago.
Yeah. Egyptians differed from their neighbors with regards to treatment of their dead. Most cultures followed a custom of cremation, where they would burn the dead. Mm-hmm. A lot of them did that. But the Egyptians, they placed a reverence on the preservation of the body and its treatment after death. So they thought if you didn't treat the body with respect and try to preserve it, that it would come back to life and kill you. Come on, look at that. Yeah. So early burials were very simple. Like they found a lot of burials in this time period in Egypt. And they think a lot of it was if people died out in the desert, they would naturally mummify and they would find their corpse. And so they're like, this must be what the gods want us to do. And a lot of it was superstition and not knowing how things work too. Right. You know, because we're talking 8,000 years ago.
We didn't have a lot of science knowledge.
No, they had more than most in Egypt, though. They learned a lot of it probably because they were trying to mummify.
Yeah, exactly.
But early burials in Egypt were simple.
You said early burials.
It was just a small oval grave, like a pit with a body placed inside, and there was no real ritual to it. It was just like they dug an oval and threw the person in and buried him.
That's how I like it.
Yep. And eventually graves were found with clay pots and other offerings. And as we get to the end of the pre-dynastic period, we start to see more objects of increasing value laid in with the deceased, and then the deceased laid in specific ways.
Right.
Like, and the bodies were arranged with the face pointing east towards the rising sun or west towards the land of the dead. So it was either they were facing east or facing west.
What was the significance of going one way or the other? Do you know?
It was like the rising sun was their god.
Right, but why did they decide who went one way and who went the other?
I don't know.
Maybe male or female?
Who knows? Maybe it was the personal beliefs of the person or that tribe. The graves also became larger and rectangular. They found pottery in the graves and jars that had painted with people dancing, funeral processions, and they found a lot of like art with a bird-faced, bare-breasted woman with long skirts. Bare-breasted, bird-faced women. Bare-breasted, bird-faced women. Say that 3 times fast. Okay. But men were also found buried with weapons, while women would be found with cosmetics. The men get the weapons and the women get the makeup.
You know, I think women got the good end of the deal. I want more makeup than I want weapons.
Put it on me, put it in with me.
And listen,
it's fine.
I think that women's one of your weapons can be makeup.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right? There you go.
By the year, and there's a little bit, a couple of different sources had different dates here, and there's a big difference in like 1,000 years. But we'll say 36 to 2600, 3,600 to 2,600 BCE. The Egyptians started to mummify their dead before burial. Like they started to the process of doing it themselves before they actually buried the person. They would pre-mummify them.
Right.
And this is just like they would find bodies mummified naturally and then figured that's how they're supposed to be. So they would try to mimic the process just to ensure that their body would be intact after the fact. I'll get to that in a minute. This process was performed on the deceased by special priests, and this process took 70 days. And the priests who performed this long ritual would not only need to know the prayers for the ritual, but also the human anatomy. So, like, this is where science starts to come into it, along with the mythology of it.
Which we so much history of medicine has a lot of mythology or a lot of religious influences.
But the difference, like with Egyptians, they wanted to know what was going on in the body.
They didn't use religion to
make it so you can't cut a person open. You know, theirs was the opposite. They're like, we got to take all this juicy stuff out so we can dry them out so they can go on to the afterlife. In order for you to be accepted, their belief was in order to be accepted into the afterlife, your body must be preserved after death.
Right.
When a person dies, their vitality, what they called Ka, K-A, leaves the body and will only return to the body if it is embalmed properly. So the embalming made it possible for your soul to go on into the afterlife. So like, but if you're, and that's like, you see that a lot with mummies found with their like smashed faces because they're trying to make it so they don't live on forever.
Oh.
Like Akhenaten, which I talked about.
Did you say that?
I did.
It was 2 years ago.
It was.
My brain doesn't hold that information for that long.
After death, the funerary priest would escort the body to this word is IBW, however you pronounce that in Egyptian, which means a place of purification, and there it would be bathed, and then they would take it to the Nefer, which was the house of beauty, where it would be mummified. Okay. So we're going to purify it first, and then we're going to beautify it. But they were beautiful in their own way.
Of course.
Yes.
You think they are.
Yes. A successful mummification was reliant on the removal of moisture from the body. And that there was multiple ways that they did this. This started, and I'm talking mostly what I'm talking about is during the 18th dynasty, that was the peak of the expensive mummification process. Like that's when like we're talking Tutankhamun and Ramses and Akhenaten and all of them, they were all, and we have like Tutmosis and Seti, and we have Ramses, we have all these mummies, but they would, there were multiple levels of mummification, but I'm going to talk about the high level first. You know, the big dog mummification, how they did it. This would start with the removal of the internal organs, and they would do an abdominal incision on most of the time, and we're talking like 99.99% of the time, this was on the left side of the body. And they would make an incision, and then they would remove all the internal organs, like the stomach and the intestines and the lungs. Yeah. They believed this, like they would leave the heart in place. Okay. Everything else came out, but the heart stayed because they believed this is where a person's intelligence and like their Ka, that's where it resided.
Like their soul, kind of.
Right. After they would remove the internal organs from the abdominal cavity, they would like, we have this big spongy mass inside the head. How are we going to get that out?
This is where it gets real.
It is. The brain was removed through a process called excerebration.
That sounds like a party thing.
It's not. Well, it was a party. A real gross one. This involved the use of a metal chisel to punch a hole through the ethmoid bone, which is in your sinus. Yeah. It's the bone between your sinus cavity and your brain. It would go through your nostril on the left side.
Yeah.
And they'd punch a hole with this chisel. And then they would use this stick made of bamboo or palm originally. Eventually, these were made out of iron with a hook on the end. Mm-hmm. And they would shove this through that hole they just made. And then they would wiggle it around in there and pull out the chunks of your brain. And then when they couldn't pull out any more chunks, they just whisk it around, and they would pour different chemicals or whatever in there to dissolve it. And then they would turn you over onto your abdomen and lift your head out, and the rest of your brain would just pour out of your nose.
And that's similar to what they did to people when they did lobotomies originally.
They do it through their eye.
Yeah, but it's the same kind of, they got in there and they whisked things up.
They were dead though, so it was okay.
Yeah, these were people.
Yeah, that's not so good. That's really gross when you're alive.
It's really gross always, but don't do that when people are living.
But this stick was about 6 to 8 inches long, and then they would liquefy the brain, let it flow out the nose. And this was almost always the same thing. It was almost always done on the left side. And I think they associated the left side with the east and the right side with the west.
Okay.
So, and it's like the rising sun, and it was like they thought that things moved from one side to the other side.
Okay.
So that's why you almost always see it on the one side. It had to do with their religion and how things were.
Interesting.
Yeah. The organs, along with the body, were then placed in natron, which is a specific kind of salt, has like sodium bicarbonate. It's white, it's found, and they would basically bury the body and the organs in this natron. They would put it in bags inside the abdominal cavity, and they would cover the body completely with it and let it sit. And this dehydration is basically what they're doing with salt. It's like absorbing all the fluids out of the body. This took about 40 days.
Oh.
And
a long time.
They're salting the fish. It's like they put salt and stuff to preserve it.
Yeah.
Basically, what this salt is doing is they're just stopping the decay, the decomposing process, and the salt's just leaching all the liquid out of the corpse, so there's nothing left. And that's why they removed all those organs ahead of time, because they're going to have a better dehydration
too.
Right. After the 40 days was done, the lungs, the stomach, liver, intestines would each be placed in a separate canopic jar, and they would be buried along with the body. And that varied a lot. And then eventually it gets to a point where they would just put the organs back in the body, but they still had the canopic jars because it was part of the whole funeral thing.
Right.
The burial. And as we know, because of King Tut's tomb that was found, the tombs got real elaborate, with more than just pottery and bare-breasted bird-faced women.
Bare-breasted bird-faced women.
The second part, after the 40 days of dehydration, the second part took 30 days. And this was to transform the deceased into a divine being. And the first thing they would do is they would coat the body in wine. Like, we just took all the moisture out. Let's put some more back.
Yeah, some wine.
Right. Well, it's alcohol, so, And then they would cover it with wine, and then they would apply different kinds of oils to the body. And that was to make it more supple so that when they wrapped it in linen, it wouldn't be brittle.
Okay.
And some of it was to do with the spells and the chants and the prayers and stuff. They also would put a golden resin over the body, and that was to protect it from bacteria and insects. And finally, the body would be wrapped in linen strips, and they would place amulets different spots of the body as they were wrapping it. Okay. And that's why, King Tut's mummy was in such a bad state, is because they were playing the unwrap game while they were trying.
Like they do.
Right, trying to get all the amulets out of when the mummy was the real treasure.
Right. And dumb.
Big assholes. They got to get the loot.
Yeah.
Gotta get that loot. And then the priests would chant prayers and burn incense while all this was happening. And then, the anointing of the body and the wrapping would take 30 days. It was like a drawn out process. So the actual mummification part was 40 days in the natron. They would prepare the body and they'd stick it in the natron, and then I don't know what they did while it was.
It was getting, how people own dehydrators now?
Yeah.
It was
basically jerky, maybe making human jerky.
They do now.
They would use different plant gums to stick the linen bandages to the body, and they would, when it was all wrapped, they would place a small wooden name tag around the neck. They would write their name on that little wooden tag and place that around the neck. And depending on the wealth and rank of the person, an elaborate mask would be placed over the head. depending on what you could afford, there were different tiers of mummification. And at first, like, the first mummification was only done on people of, like, the royalty.
Right.
Or people that had some kind of importance. And but eventually it became available to all the citizens, people who could afford it. And sometimes they wouldn't actually remove the organs in the body. They would just inject it with oil of cedar tree, and then to prevent leakage and seepage, right? And it would basically prevent it from the water from going anywhere. So they would inject the abdominal cavity with this cedar oil, and then they would place the body in a natron, and then after the 40 days, they would take the body out, and then they would poke a hole in it, and all the liquefied, putrefied organs that were inside it would just pour out. So that was like a cheaper version.
That's gross.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the smell when they bust that open?
Yeah, I can't.
They must have had things in their nostril.
They'd have to. And even the most poor people, if they couldn't afford mummification, there were specific prayers they said could be said to ensure that you would go into the afterlife.
Well, that's nice that they had that option for people.
Why wouldn't they just do that for everybody?
I know. If it worked, why would they lie to them?
I'm glad that they did it because they have all this knowledge about ancient Egyptians and their lives and stuff. Because, I mean, even though they removed their internal organs, they were still there. Just separated. Yeah. They were still dehydrated. And then they put them, so like anything they ate was still in their stomach. Isn't it? It's insane. But yeah, and even like Cleopatra's time, lots of people were getting mummified. So you can see a lot of they're not as old. They're still old. Caesar, that's still a long time ago. But that's more this century. Right. So you could find a lot of mummies from that era because it was more popular, and they had gotten it down to a point where they didn't have to. It wasn't as much of a process as it used to be. I think because a lot of it was resolved. It was just like for the pharaoh and the pharaoh's family and people who might be high up priests and things like that got mummified. So it wasn't something that I don't think they did a lot. And I think it was more like more people are getting it done. So because I think it was probably like, well, I've got all this money. Can't you do it for me too? Sure. How are you going to know if they'd actually do it or not? They could take your money, just throw it in the ditch in the backyard.
Yeah. Remember Carl Sandler? Wasn't that the name? The episode I did remember he mummified them?
No, it wasn't Sandler. It was Carl.
What the heck was his name?
Carl Sandler's Undying Love. Yeah, but he made her as a sex doll.
It was so gross. Carl Tanzler. Tanzler?
Yeah, it was down one of the earlier episodes.
Yeah, one of our earlier episodes. Grotesque.
I've done a few mummy ones, and then there's the Lady Di, the Swamp Bog Body. That one was fun. That was an early one. And then I did Lady Dia.
Yes.
She Lady Di, DAI. That was a gooey mummy one. That one was. You can find that if you could look her up on YouTube and watch that. It was nauseating. It was like, I couldn't eat.
You were talking.
It's really gross. And I watch a lot of mummy things, but that one was just it was nasty, gross, grotesque.
Yeah.
And I've done a few, like the Capuchin monks.
Yep. I love that one.
That one was
my favorite.
That one, and then there was the one with the was it the Capuchin monks? There was another one too that I did with mummies.
Oh yeah, both. They were lined inside something.
Yeah, and then there was the most beautiful mummy.
The most beautiful.
Yeah, but yeah, it's interesting. I like learning about things like that. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can send us a direct message through Instagram or Facebook. If you're not already following us, please go do that now.
Do it right now.
Fun. Yeah, go on our Instagram. We're just The Cousins Weird. You could also send us an email at thecousinsweird@gmail.com. And there's a link tree in the episode. Just go down there and all this information will be there. You just click on it and it takes you right to it. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram. You can like our posts. You can please go on your podcast platform of choice and rate us and leave a review. That's the word I'm looking for. All right. Stay freaky.
Bye.
Bye.